You may think it's strange to sleep in a coffin by choice, but what's truly strange is how peaceful it felt. Not at first. No, not that first night. The first night it felt like being lowered into the throat of the earth. But by the third night, it felt like the world itself had paused to let me breathe. I didn't go looking for the stillness cult. They found me, and it all began with a letter. It was mid-autumn when it arrived. Though my memory is patchy about those months, I remember the leaves in the garden had turned the color of dried blood, and the sky seemed to hang lower than usual, a gray blanket wrapped too tightly around the horizon. I hadn't slept properly in weeks. The letter came without warning, no return address, no name, just my full name written in thick ink on the front of the envelope. The paper was unusually heavy, handmade maybe. There was a small wax seal pressed on the back in the shape of a half-closed eye. I remember hesitating before opening it. Something about it felt private, as if reading it might change something fundamental. But I was tired in my bones, and the letter promised something I hadn't had in months: stillness. To the weary of mind and aching of heart, we welcome you to Stillness House, where silence mends and sleep returns. Your room has been prepared. You are expected by Sunday next. All arrangements have been made. Simply follow the enclosed map. Speak of this to no one. That was all it said. No signature, no cost, nothing. Just the map drawn by hand, showing a route I didn't recognize. A thin line winding through moors and hills, ending at a place called Thorn Hollow. Something about it pulled me in. I was skeptical, of course, but not enough to ignore it. Maybe you felt that kind of draw before. Not excitement, not fear, just inevitability. I packed lightly, a few clothes, my journal, a flask of tea for the train ride. No one saw me off. I hadn't been seeing anyone much. Sleep deprivation does that. It makes you vanish slowly from other people's lives. First, they forget to call. Then, you forget to care. The train ride was long and quiet. I passed towns I'd never heard of. Stations that didn't even appear on most maps. By dusk, I had reached the end of the line, a station with no sign, just a wooden bench and a rusted lamp flickering against the mist. A man in a black coat stood waiting for me, holding a lantern and saying nothing. He didn't ask my name, just nodded, turned, and walked into the moor. I followed. The walk was longer than I expected. An hour, at least. No sound but the crunch of gravel and the distant hoot of an owl. And then, out of the mist it appeared. Stillness House. I know this will sound theatrical, but the house looked asleep. Its windows glowed with faint candlelight, yet nothing moved behind the glass. Ivy had grown wild across its stone walls, and the front door stood open, as if waiting for me. Inside, everything was soft. Not in the way of comfort, but in the way of silence. No ticking clocks, no footsteps. Even the floorboards refused to creak. I was led to a room at the end of a long corridor, room V. It was small, clean, a single bed, a mirror covered in dark cloth, and a journal on the bedside table, blank but inviting. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because of fear, but because I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Anticipation. Morning arrived, not with the sound of birds, but with the quiet knock on my door. A girl in a gray uniform handed me a robe and a note. Breakfast at the garden room. Silence is to be observed until dusk, and so I obeyed. I dressed. I followed the hallways. I found the garden room, its tall windows steamed over with morning fog tables set with silver cutlery, each guest seated and silent chewing, slowly eyes soft and unfocused. I sat at the only empty chair. Porridge, stewed apples, black tea. No one looked at me, but I could feel it, the awareness of my presence, like a ripple in still water. It was only after breakfast that I met Lady Thorne. She appeared without sound, as if the air had shaped her. Tall, slender, wrapped in layers of black velvet. Her hair was silver, not gray, but silver like moonlight soaked in ink. "You must be tired," she said softly. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it rang clearly. The body can survive exhaustion, but the soul... She placed her hand gently over her chest. The soul crumbles piece by piece when noise overstays its welcome. I nodded, unsure what to say. She smiled as if satisfied. "You've come to the right place. Stillness will find you here, and in time, you'll sleep like the dead." I should have turned back then. I should have asked her what she meant, but I didn't, because in that moment, it sounded like a promise. Stillness House didn't creak. That's the first thing I noticed as I stepped further into its stone hallways. Even in older estates, the wooden floorboards usually speak, grumbling softly beneath footfalls, sighing under the weight of time. But here, nothing. My footsteps were swallowed by the plush black carpets that stretched endlessly down the corridors. The curtains, long and velvet, barely stirred, even though I could see the wind brushing the trees outside. Even the clocks didn't tick. In fact, I never saw a single clock inside the entire house, as if time itself was discouraged from speaking. The hallways were lit only by wall-mounted lanterns, not electric, not gas, real candles. Their flames flickered slowly in small glass domes, casting dancing shadows on the pale stone. There was something about the air, not cold exactly, but hushed, like the inside of a church, or a library that had long forgotten its books. I wandered silently, unsure if I was allowed to. No one stopped me. In fact, I passed several others in the hall guests like myself, dressed in the same soft gray robes. Some nodded faintly as they passed. Others simply kept walking, eyes distant, as if deep inside themselves. No one spoke, not even the staff. The silence wasn't forced. It was contagious. I found myself tiptoeing without thinking, breathing slower, blinking softer. And the longer I stayed, the more I realized stillness wasn't just a rule. It was a presence. Lady Thorne had called it a sanctuary. She wasn't wrong. My room. Room V was simple but immaculate. Polished floorboards, a writing desk, a wardrobe with 3 identical robes folded precisely. The bed was firm but comforting, with sheets that smelled faintly of lavender and wood smoke. There was one window. It looked out over a field of long grass, its blades bending together like they too had agreed to remain silent. And on the windowsill, a single white feather. I don't know why, but it unsettled me, not in a threatening way. More like a forgotten memory brushing against the edge of my mind. After a few hours of rest, a folded note slid under my door. "You are invited to the orientation chamber at the 8th bell. Please come with an open heart." There was no clock, but something inside me, maybe that strange rhythm of the house, told me when it was time. I stepped into the hallway just as others did, each emerging from their rooms in silence. robes flowing around ankles, forming a slow procession down the corridor. We descended a stone staircase into a lower wing of the estate. The further we went, the cooler it became. Not unpleasant, but expectant, as if the walls were holding their breath. The orientation chamber was nothing like I imagined. No chairs, no podium, no stage. Just a round room lined with tall mirrors, each covered in sheer black veils. In the center, a circle of cushions surrounding a shallow basin filled with dark water. And standing beside it, Lady Thorne. She greeted us with a raised hand, not to wave, but to request attention. Then she began to speak, and somehow, though her voice never rose above a whisper, every word settled clearly into my ear. "You have come here not to be healed," she said, "but to remember. Remember the depth of silence, the cradle of stillness, the power of surrender." Her hands moved slowly, almost like a conductor's. "You will eat in silence. You will sleep in silence. You will walk, breathe, think in silence." She turned slowly, letting her gaze sweep across us. Because only in the absence of noise can the self finally speak. Then she invited each of us to step forward and place our hands in the basin. The water was cold, still, deeper than it looked. As I touched its surface, I felt a strange pressure in my chest, like a memory pressing against my ribs. "Tonight," she said, "your true rest begins." We were dismissed with a silent gesture, and yet no one truly left. We lingered in the chamber for some time, eyes glancing at the veiled mirrors, wondering what lay beneath. I dared not peek. Not then. On the way back to my room, I passed a hallway I hadn't seen before. Narrow, lit with only 2 candles. At its end stood a tall wooden door, slightly ajar. Curiosity tugged at me, but another part, perhaps the more intelligent part, urged me to wait. That night in my room, I tried to write in the journal they'd given me, but every time I dipped the pen in ink, I found my thoughts dissolving into fog. Words didn't feel right here. Even writing seemed too loud. So I closed the book, extinguished the candle, and lay back on the bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. The silence was thick. It pressed into my ears, my jaw, the spaces between my ribs. And for the first time in months, I did not feel alone. Not quite comforted, not yet afraid, just watched. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of a corridor. It stretched far beyond what my eyes could see. And on each side, rows of closed coffins stood upright like waiting passengers. As I walked past them one by one, their lids began to creak open. It was 2 days before Lady Thorne spoke to me again. In that time, the house had quietly reshaped me. Meals were wordless gatherings. We sat around long oak tables, lit only by beeswax candles. The food was always warm, subtle, calming root vegetables, herbal stews, lightly toasted bread. No meats, no stimulants, no sugar. After each meal, we were expected to walk slowly through the inner gardens. Shoes were not allowed. You could feel the chill of the stone paths beneath your feet. Sometimes I passed other guests, their eyes half-lidded hands folded behind backs, moving as if underwater. They did not acknowledge me. I had begun to do the same. In this place, emotions didn't disappear. They just became quieter, like music from another room. I found myself forgetting my last name. Then the day of the week. Then the fact that days even mattered. But I still had questions. Quiet ones, and questions, no matter how softly asked, have a way of being heard here. It was late afternoon when a note appeared on my writing desk. The lady invites you to the atrium of repose. Dusk. I followed the corridor past the west wing until I found a narrow spiral staircase carved from blackened stone. At the top was a small circular chamber with high windows stained in blue and gold. It felt older than the rest of the house, less arranged, more ancient. Lady Thorne stood beside a narrow table pouring 2 cups of tea from a ceramic pot painted with feather motifs. No steam rose from it. The tea was cool to the touch, infused with something faintly floral, faintly bitter. "We drink it cold," she said, "to remind the body that comfort is earned." I took the cup and sipped. The taste lingered on the roof of my mouth, strange and unfamiliar. It wasn't unpleasant, just unfamiliar. She sat across from me and studied my face in the flickering window light. Her hands were perfectly still. She did not blink often. "Tell me," she said softly, "what is it you are truly seeking?" I wasn't sure how to answer. Sleep, peace, forgiveness. Instead, I said, "I want to stop feeling like I'm falling through my own mind." She nodded slowly, as if I had spoken a truth older than either of us. "Stillness," she said, "is not the absence of sound. It is the suspension of identity." She placed her cup down with delicate care. We spend our lives reacting, flinching, chasing, screaming, without making a sound. But in silence, something remarkable happens. The surface breaks, and what lies beneath speaks. She rose and motioned for me to follow. We walked together through a narrow corridor lined with veiled portraits, dozens of them. Each frame bore the name of someone who had stayed here. Some names were scratched out. At the end of the corridor, a set of black double doors opened into what she called the thought chamber. Inside were no books, no furniture, only floor cushions and a single altar shaped like a shallow bowl carved from onyx. There was water in it still as glass, but reflecting no light. The first lesson, she whispered, is surrender. I sat without being told to. The air was cool, tinged with the scent of pine and sandalwood. She stood behind me. "When you are ready, you will lie down. And when you lie down, you will cease to be you. The noise in your mind will struggle at first. That is expected. That is good. But then you will meet the silence beneath your name." I turned to look at her. "Is that what happened to the others?" I asked. "The ones in the portraits." Her eyes flicked toward the corridor, but she said nothing. Then, gently, "Some came to forget. Some came to remember. Some came to disappear." She let the words settle like dust. Then, at last, "You are not required to believe, only to be still long enough to hear what tries to speak through you." She bowed slightly, then left me alone in the chamber. I sat there for what felt like hours, listening, not for sounds, but for something beneath them. The kind of silence that presses gently against your skull, like the hush before a confession. That night, I returned to my room and lay in bed, fully closed eyes, wide open, waiting. Not for sleep, not anymore. I was waiting for the quiet to come and take me home. And it did. Around midnight I felt it. A presence, not in the room, but inside my chest. Like a pair of hands folding around my ribs, calm, cool, and wordless. And for the first time in years, I let go of what I couldn't say. A name, a grief, A memory, not mine. It didn't matter, because that night in the heart of the House of Silence, I finally heard nothing, and it was beautiful. The invitation came at dusk. It was not written on paper, but stitched onto a piece of black velvet. One word sewn in silver thread: prepare. No time, no instructions, no name. But I understood. By now, Stillness House had taught me how to read silence. I dressed in the ceremonial robe left folded on my bed. It was heavier than the others, lined with something that felt like silk, but carried a slight resistance, like it had been woven to hold memory. The moment I slipped it on, my body reacted. My pulse slowed, my shoulders lowered, my breath came shallow and smooth. I followed the hallway eastward, past the veiled portraits and unlit corridors, toward a part of the house I hadn't yet seen. Two tall figures in gray met me at the threshold, silent, expressionless. They bowed in unison and opened a carved wooden door. The room beyond was warmer than I expected, and darker. The ritual room. I hesitate to call it that. It had another name here, whispered only once: the Cradle Hall. Inside, 12 coffins stood in a perfect circle, their lids open interiors lined in black velvet, embroidered with pale silver thread symbols I didn't recognize but felt eerily familiar. At the center of the circle stood Lady Thorne. She held a small ceramic cup in both hands. Steam rose from it, slowly coiling like mist across a pond. Tonight, she said, you will not sleep. You will descend. Her voice echoed softly through the chamber, not because it was loud, but because the room had been carved to carry even the quietest breath. One by one, the others entered. I recognized a few faces I'd passed in the garden room or seen drifting silently through the corridors. We stood at the edge of the circle, each in front of one coffin. No one moved. Lady Thorne stepped to the first guest and offered the cup. The blend is sacred, she said. Mugwort, valerian, angelica, blue lotus, and a root that remembers. Each person drank in turn, their expressions blank eyes, dimly reflective. When she reached me, I hesitated. The cup was cool in my hands. Its contents shimmered faintly, as if catching light that wasn't there. I drank. It tasted of earth and rain and old paper. Not bitter, not sweet, just inevitable. Lady Thorne turned to us all. You will lie still. You will not resist. You will not seek sleep. Sleep will find you. Then she raised her hand, and we obeyed. Sliding into the coffin was unlike anything I'd experienced. The wood was warm, not cold. The velvet cradled my limbs precisely. There were no hard edges. It felt made for me. The lid remained open. Candlelight flickered above, casting soft ripples across the curved ceiling. Somewhere, a slow chime rang. One note held too long to feel accidental. And then Lady Thorne began to hum. It wasn't a song, not in the usual sense. It was a tone, low, sustained, resonant. Others joined in their hums, rising and falling like breath over water. The sound circled the room, threading between us like invisible silk. My eyes closed on their own. The silence inside me, already vast, deepened. It became a tunnel. No thoughts, no images, just falling. Soft, endless falling. But I was not asleep. I was aware of the coffin beneath me, of the echo in my chest, of a sound not part of the humming, a whisper brushing just outside my hearing. A name, not mine, not one I knew, But it stirred something. Then a flicker, a memory, no too unfamiliar. A face, pale, still mouth slightly open as if to speak. I tried to move. I could not. I opened my eyes, or thought I did. The ceiling above had changed. No longer stone, just dark, empty. And the flickering candlelight was coming from inside the coffin. Not fire, but reflections, flickering across the velvet like shadows of leaves. Except there were no leaves here. Then I saw it, not a leaf, a handprint, pressed faintly into the lining just above my head. Small, child-sized, as if someone had lain here before me and tried to press upward. I sat up with effort. The others were still in their coffins, eyes closed. Their breathing was shallow. Some smiled faintly. One mouthed something soundless but rhythmic like a prayer. Lady Thorne stood at the edge of the circle watching me. She tilted her head slightly. Not disapproval, curiosity. I opened my mouth to speak, but the air was thick. Like words didn't belong here. Instead, she crossed the room and gently placed her hand on my forehead. "You remembered," she whispered. "Good." Then she helped me lie back down. I didn't fall asleep again. Not that night. But I closed my eyes, and this time I saw a hallway, stone walls, and a door, slightly ajar, with my name carved into it. I did not enter. I only stood and watched it slowly open. And then I woke back in my room. The ceremonial robe folded neatly again on the chair. The feather on the windowsill, gone. But in its place, a small handprint faint in dust. The note came at twilight, folded like origami, and slipped under my door. "Tonight your silence is yours alone. The cradle awaits." There was no signature, but it didn't need one. I already knew who sent it and where it would lead me. This time the hallway was darker. The lanterns had been dimmed, or perhaps the flame inside them had grown weary. The air felt heavier, more aware of itself. Stillness House no longer welcomed me with soft silence. Now it stood watch, listening. I walked alone down the eastern passage, past curtained alcoves and doorways that seemed deeper than they should be. When I arrived at the ritual room, the great doors were already open. Inside, one coffin, one candle, and a jug of the same dream tea waiting beside it. The others were absent. Only me and the silence. The coffin was already open. It looked smaller tonight, more personal. Its velvet interior was darker, and for a moment I thought I saw something shift in the lining like a breath beneath fabric. But when I blinked, it was gone. I poured myself a cup of the tea. The scent was different this time. Still floral, but sharper, almost metallic like iron and violets. I drank, slowly, sitting beside the coffin watching the flame dance. I waited, and the house waited with me. When I finally slid inside the coffin, I did so without hesitation. No fear, no resistance. Only a kind of resigned curiosity. Like a child crawling under a blanket, unsure if they're hiding from the monster or joining it. The moment I lay flat, the candle flickered once, then went out. I did not move. The silence inside the coffin was different. Not peaceful, not hostile, just absolute. As if even my thoughts had grown too loud and left me behind. And then I began to dream. At first it was only colors. Muted grays, deep green-black, smears of ochre like old wallpaper. Then came the scent old wood, whetstone, and something sweet, rotting fruit. And then I was walking, not in the coffin, but through a hallway. Stillness house. But not as I knew it. The walls were breathing slowly like sleeping lungs. The floor was damp. Paintings blinked as I passed. And in every room I looked into someone lay in a coffin. Not sleeping, waiting. Their eyes open, unmoving. Some whispered, but the words made no sound. Then I reached a door, one I hadn't seen before. It was marked with the letter V. My room. But inside was not my room. It was a nursery. Old, dust-covered. A crib stood in the center, rocking gently, though no one touched it. And on the far wall, a mirror, uncovered. I approached it slowly, half expecting to see a younger version of myself. But the face staring back at me was someone else. She was a girl, maybe 9. Hair braided, eyes wide, mouth slightly open as if in warning. She stood inside the mirror, not a reflection, a presence. And behind her was the same coffin I now lay in. I tried to speak, but my jaw was locked. I reached toward the mirror, and she reached back. Not to mirror me, but to touch me. Her fingers pressed against the glass, and suddenly I was inside it. Or perhaps she was inside me. The dream shattered. I woke with a start. Back in the coffin, in the ritual room. The candle had relit itself, barely a stub now. My skin was cold, my breath shallow. My hands tingled, as if they'd been clutching something tightly in sleep. I sat up and froze. On the far side of the room stood a girl, the same girl, braided hair, dress from another century. She did not move. Her face was calm, but her eyes, they were mine. I blinked, and she was gone. Just like that. No sound, no movement, no door opening or closing. Only me. And the rising knowledge that the silence was no longer empty. I returned to my room. The hallway felt tighter. Each step echoed though I walked barefoot. When I opened the door to room 5, the first thing I saw was the journal. It had been opened. To a page I did not write. The body is only a door. Some doors open in both directions. And beneath it, drawn in delicate uneven ink, was the outline of a child's hand. I did not sleep again that night. Not for fear, not for confusion, but because I wasn't sure which version of me would wake up next. Silence had a flavor here. At first I thought it tasted like restraint. Softly chewed root vegetables, the absence of salt. The steam from tea allowed to cool before drinking. But now it tasted like something withheld. A word on the tip of the tongue. A name swallowed and never spoken again. Stillness House fed us 3 times a day. Always at the same hour. Always in the garden room. Always in silence. The garden room was long and high-ceilinged, lined with windows that looked out over hedges trimmed like labyrinths. Long tables stretched down its center, set each day with modest place settings, ceramic bowls, wooden spoons, linen napkins the color of dust. We sat in the same seats, not by rule, but by quiet habit. I always sat across from the woman in green. That wasn't her name, of course. No one knew names here, not unless they slipped, and no one ever did. But she always wore a robe tinged with soft green hues, unlike the rest of us in gray. She had gentle eyes, and she often kept them closed while she ate, as though savoring silence as much as flavor. That morning, the broth was thinner than usual, barely seasoned, floating with herbs I didn't recognize. but I was grateful for the warmth it grounded me. The night before still clung to my skin like mist. The girl, the mirror, the waking, the handprint. I hadn't spoken of it. I wouldn't dare. But the memory gnawed at the edges of my thoughts as I spooned the broth into my mouth, slowly, quietly. Then something happened. A sound barely audible, a whisper. So soft it could have been breath. But it wasn't. Across from me, the woman in green had leaned slightly forward, lips barely parted. Her spoon frozen mid-air. "You saw her," she whispered. I froze. Not because of the words, but because she had spoken. Out loud. Around us no one reacted. No gasps, no turning heads. But I felt it. A shift. Like the house had inhaled sharply. I lowered my spoon, staring at her. My voice caught in my throat, not from fear, but from years of forgetting how to speak in such stillness. "Who?" I mouthed. She blinked slowly, then whispered again, barely more than air. "The girl. She comes to those who remember too soon." Then, like a wave receding, she closed her eyes, raised her spoon, and resumed eating as if nothing had happened. I looked around. No one else reacted. Some smiled faintly at their bowls. Some stared ahead, glassy-eyed. One man seemed to be weeping, silently, tears rolling down his face as he sipped from his cup. No one looked at me, or her, or the silence that had just shattered, if only for a breath. Later that day, I found her seat empty. At lunch, at supper, and by the next morning gone. The staff had cleared her setting. Her room, once beside mine, was now bolted shut. No robe, no traces. It was as if she had never existed. I approached Lady Thorne that evening, hoping for some explanation. She was standing in the inner courtyard, feeding small seeds to birds that never came. I waited beside her, hands folded. After a long pause, she spoke. Not all stillness is shared. Some hold on to echoes. I opened my mouth, then stopped. She turned to face me, her eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. Not cold, not wise, but tired. "Do not speak of things not yours to carry," she said quietly. "Some names bring noise." Then she placed a single black seed into my palm and walked away. That night, I dreamt again. This time, I was not in a coffin, but beneath one, buried. Looking up through wood grain and velvet folds, hearing footsteps above me, slow, methodical, too many to count. The girl's face appeared, peering through cracks in the lid. But she didn't look curious anymore. She looked disappointed. "You weren't supposed to listen," she whispered. Then the dream split open, like paper soaked in water. I awoke to the sound of scratching. At first I thought it was in the walls, then beneath the floorboards, then from inside the wardrobe. I sat up, the blankets clinging to me with strange dampness. The scratching stopped, replaced by whispering. Not voices, just one, mine, repeating my name over and over in the voice of the woman in green. I rose trembling, opened the wardrobe. Nothing, just folded robes, a cup, and in the corner, a feather, green tinted, unlike the white one from before. I didn't report what happened. Stillness House was not a place of confession, and I had learned my lesson. Whatever she had whispered into the quiet, the house had heard. And stillness, once so soft, now had teeth. The first whisper came just after midnight. I'd been lying in bed, unmoving, eyes closed, but not asleep, drifting in that fragile space where thought becomes vapor. And then I heard it. A soft breath. A name. Mine. Not shouted, not even spoken. Just released. As if the walls themselves had exhaled my identity. I sat up slowly. The candle on the desk had long since gone out. Moonlight pooled faintly on the floor, shaped like stretched hands. I waited. Maybe I'd imagined it. Sleep deprivation can mold silence into strange shapes. But then it came again. Fainter this time, almost apologetic. El, only the first syllable, but undeniably me. And undeniably from inside the wall. I rose without thinking, barefoot, careful, drawn toward the far corner of the room where the stone met the paneling. I pressed my ear to the wall, at first nothing, then soft scratching like a finger, tracing slow circles on the other side. Then a low voice, not mine, not Lady Thorne's, a child's voice. It's not sleeping, it whispered. It's remembering. My breath caught, and then silence. Thick, heavy, final. I stepped back, staring at the wall. Something was wrong with it. The stone here was uneven, too smooth in places like it had been covered up. I ran my fingers along the grout line and felt it a seam. Thin, hidden, a door. Not a full door, but a panel, tall enough to crawl through. And beside it, nearly invisible in the dark, an engraving, fingernail thin, scratched by hand, one word. Listen. I didn't open it that night. I didn't need to, because something behind it had already opened me. The next day, I watched the others closely. At breakfast, no one spoke as always. But something had shifted. They were blinking more often, shifting in their seats. One man stirred his broth exactly 12 times before tasting it. Another traced the edge of his spoon with a finger again and again. Repetition, restlessness, ripples. Stillness was cracking, and I was not the only one who noticed. After the meal, I found Lady Thorne walking the stone path of the east garden, barefoot, her robe trailing behind like a shadow without form. I fell into step beside her. We said nothing for some time, just the rustle of dry grass, the soft breath of the house in the distance. Then she spoke. The house does not punish, she said. It reflects. She didn't look at me when she said it. Didn't need to. Some walls speak only to those who ask questions before they're ready for answers. I opened my mouth, but she raised her hand gently. Whatever you heard, speak it only to the part of yourself that remembers. Then she walked on, and left me with the cold wind and the echo of her warning. That night I did not sleep in the bed. I slid back into the coffin in the ritual room alone. No tea, no ceremony, just me, the wood, the velvet, and the darkness. I closed the lid myself and waited. This time the dream came differently. No hallway, no mirror, just the panel in my wall. I watched it swing open on its own. Behind it, a spiral staircase descending into pitch black, and a sound rising from below, not footsteps, not breathing, but chanting, soft, desperate, like someone trying to remember a prayer they once knew as a child. And over it all, a second voice, clearer, older, mine. You were never asleep. You just forgot how to open your eyes. I woke with a gasp. The lid of the coffin was slightly ajar. I didn't remember opening it. The candle above had melted down to a puddle. I climbed out shivering and returned to my room, barely feeling the ground beneath me. The panel in the wall was still there, And now, beside the word listen, someone had scratched another word just beneath it. Soon! That morning, Lady Thorne announced a new ritual. Her voice echoed across the garden room like a breeze over water. Some of you have reached thresholds, she said. The next descent will be deeper. No one asked questions. No one clapped. But something in the air grew sharper. Some smiled, some paled. But I felt it in my bones. We had passed from ritual into something else. A threshold. Not just spiritual, but architectural, physical. Later, I passed the hallway near the eastern wing. The one with the sealed door. The one they said led to the hollow room. I had never seen it open. Until now. Only a crack, but enough. From within, a breath. A flicker of movement. And the sound of a coffin lid. Closing. I turned to go, but before I did, I saw something on the floor just inside the threshold. A small green feather, floating gently, as if it had been waiting for me. I don't know what drew me to the corner behind the wardrobe that morning. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the voice I kept hearing in my dreams, whispering not words, but direction. Look closer, it always seemed to say. Not at the room, at the memory inside it. So I moved the wardrobe. It wasn't heavy. Surprisingly light, in fact, almost as if someone had already pushed it once before. Behind it, stone wall, but different from the rest. The grout here was newer, the dust thinner, the air colder. And just at the base, hidden behind a cracked tile, a hollow space. Inside it, a book. It was bound in soft red leather, the edges frayed, the spine half cracked. No title, no clasp. Only one thing stood out. The pages were warped at the corners as if wept on. I opened it. The handwriting was sharp and angular, like someone trying to control shaking hands. It started without preamble. No greeting, no name. Just this. I don't know what day it is anymore. Maybe that's the point. Here time folds like linen and is stored in silence. I turned the pages slowly. Each entry grew shorter, more fragmented. At first, the writer described their arrival, how Stillness House had promised them peace, and how at first it delivered. They spoke of Lady Thorne. She is beautiful, like a painting, one painted by someone who never knew real people. Her eyes are too quiet, her voice too rehearsed, and yet I followed her. Then the writer described their dreams, the same coffin, the same girl, and eventually, the staircase. I went down. I shouldn't have. There are doors under this house, and not all of them are meant to open from the inside. I paused there. My heart had started to race, a strange contradiction, in a place designed to slow the pulse. I forced myself to keep reading. I heard them whispering again last night, but not to me. To the house. They called it something, not stillness, something older. I tried to speak today. I just wanted to say good morning to someone. My throat locked. It felt like swallowing stones. They're not just teaching us to be silent. They're making us forget how to speak. Then, one page was torn, jaggedly. Deliberate. On the next, she came to me again. The girl. She sat beside the coffin and said nothing, but she held my hand. Her skin was colder than sleep. I asked her, "What is this place?" She looked at me, and I swear she had my face. I closed the journal, but I kept my fingers inside the pages. as if it might close on its own, otherwise trap me inside. I wanted to tell someone, but who? The woman in green was gone. The others would not speak. Even their eyes no longer blinked with curiosity, only habit. Stillness had hollowed them, and Lady Thorne, I wasn't ready to know what she already suspected about me. That night, I placed the journal under my pillow, just to feel its weight. I dreamt again, not of hallways, not of coffins, but of a garden, wild, overgrown. Vines crawling up statues shaped like open mouths. A windless space where nothing moved except a single swing gently swaying. And at its base, a feather. Red this time, crimson, damp. I picked it up, and the garden began to scream. I woke with tears on my cheeks. The pillow beneath me soaked through. I checked for the journal still there. But something had changed. The last page was no longer blank. In a different hand, faint rushed, someone had written, "She hears you. Say nothing." And beneath it, a symbol, drawn in charcoal. A spiral inside a spiral, like the staircase I hadn't yet descended. I spent the morning in the thought chamber, staring at the basin of black water. Its surface didn't ripple. Not even when I breathed on it. Not even when I whispered into it. Yes, I whispered, just once. Why me? The water didn't reply. But I heard a sound behind me, a quiet inhalation. I turned, no one there, only the wall. Later that evening, as I walked the garden paths, I saw her again. The girl, standing at the edge of the maze. Back to me. Dress fluttering slightly, though no wind touched the trees. I didn't approach, I only watched, and she slowly raised one hand. Not in warning, not in welcome, but in mimicry, she was holding the red journal. Then she walked into the hedge and vanished. I returned to my room before sunset. I placed the journal on the desk, opened to the middle, left the candle burning beside it, not as an offering, but as a dare. If this house truly listened, let it read me too. Let it see I was not afraid. But deep down, I was lying. The invitation came without paper, just to knock 3 soft taps against my door. At the exact moment the candle died. No one waited outside, only the hallway darker than usual. Colder, but I already knew where I was meant to go. The hollow room. I had never been inside. No one spoke of it. No one acknowledged its existence. But I had seen its door sealed, shadowed, covered in wax seals and carvings that curled like vines trying to strangle words. Now it was open, just a crack, but wide enough to call me. I walked without robe or shoes. The floor felt like breath warm pulsing faintly underfoot. My fingertips tingled, as if the house itself were waking up to greet me, or to remember me. The hallway grew narrower as I walked. Walls wept condensation. The lamps here flickered blue instead of yellow. By the time I reached the doorway to the hollow room, I felt hollow myself. Inside darkness thick and soft like wet velvet, and at its center a single coffin, different from the others. This one stood upright, its lid carved with the spiral inside spiral sigil I'd seen in the red journal. No candles, no cushions, only silence and shadow. Lady Thorne stood beside it. She wore no black this time, only white, pale as bone. She looked like a widow who had finally shed mourning. Her eyes met mine, calm and grave. "You've heard the voice," she said. "You've seen the girl, and you've remembered enough to continue." She placed one hand on the coffin. "This is not death. This is surrender. I didn't answer, not with words. There was nothing to say, only to choose. She turned and walked to the far wall, where another door stood hidden its frame, arched like the mouth of a crypt. Beyond this lies forgetting, she said, but only if you wish to forget. Then she stepped through and left me alone with the coffin. It didn't open. It waited, not inviting, not demanding, just available. Like a question that had already been asked, now waiting for the answer. I stepped forward. The sigil glowed faintly in the dark as though reacting to my breath. Then the lid creaked. Not open. Inward. It opened into itself. I placed my hand inside. The interior wasn't velvet. It was mirror, but not like glass. The reflection didn't show my body. It showed a version of me kneeling, hands folded, eyes closed. And behind me, the girl. But now she was smiling. I climbed in. It fit me perfectly, as if molded from memory. The moment my back touched the mirrored surface, I felt weightless, not floating, dissolving, like language, like history, like guilt. The lid closed on its own, and the dark was not empty. It was crowded. I heard footsteps, whispers, soft singing, familiar lullabies in unfamiliar tongues. My mother's voice, my own as a child, the woman in green, the red journal's writer, all layered, overlapping. You were here before, one voice said. You just haven't woken up yet. You left something unfinished, said another. That's why she won't let go. Stillness isn't peace, said a third. It's rehearsal. And then I saw the girl. She stood at the foot of the coffin, not looking at me, looking down at something beneath the floor I couldn't see. Her mouth moved. This time I understood. When you let go of your name, you let go of your shadow. But your shadow still remembers you. She placed one hand on the coffin, and the mirror beneath me cracked. I woke inside the hollow room. The lid had vanished. No sign of Lady Thorne, only a note beside me, written in the same angular script as the red journal. You are ready for the descent. There is no ceremony. There is only the staircase. I turned toward the far wall. The arched doorway had changed. Now behind it, I could see the top of a spiral staircase descending into darkness that pulsed like breath. I took one step forward, then another. The air grew thick, like walking into milk or memory. The stone steps creaked. The first sound I'd heard in days. And with each step downward, a voice rose behind me. Not ahead. Behind? We sleep, it whispered. But we do not dream. I stopped, turned, nothing. Only the coffin, now sealed again. And in its reflection, I was not there. Only the girl, alone, smiling, waiting. I woke to darkness. Not the gentle dark of a candlelit room. Not the hush of midnight silence. This was a dark that pressed against the inside of my eyelids. Dense, airless, absolute. I tried to move. My elbows struck wood. Close, smooth, too close. I reached upward. My fingers met velvet. Then, resistance. The lid wouldn't budge. At first I was calm. I had been here before. The ritual room, the stillness, the coffin. It was all part of the ceremony, wasn't it? I tried again. The lid did not give. I pressed harder. Nothing. Then I knocked. Once, twice. The sound didn't echo. The silence ate it. My chest tightened. I took a breath and found the air already thin. The first whisper of panic slid in, cold and smooth, like a silk ribbon around my throat. I knocked again, louder this time. "Hello, is anyone?" No voice came out. My throat dry, hollow. The words were in my mind, but they stayed there, trapped. I pushed with both hands, feet braced, muscles straining. My heart now thudding, not with fear, but with disbelief. This wasn't ritual. This was containment. Then, something scraped. Outside, faint, metal on stone. I froze and heard a voice, a child's whisper, soft and unhurried. If you try to leave too soon, the door forgets where it opened. Then footsteps. Walking away, I screamed. Or I tried to. Only a thin gasp escaped like wind through a crack in a tomb. The coffin was stealing my voice. No, stillness was. I don't know how long I lay there. Minutes, hours. Time stopped existing. Instead, the walls began to breathe. Yes, breathe. I could feel them expand and contract, as if the wood itself had lungs. And with each breath, a whisper. Not from the outside now, from beneath me, from the mirror. "We're not buried," it said. "We're remembered." I closed my eyes, not in surrender, in refusal. But the voice continued. "You thought the coffin was a container. It's not. It's a lens. It shows you what you hide." I opened my eyes and saw something I hadn't noticed before. A thin seam along the bottom panel. A slot, no wider than a hand. I reached inside and touched paper. It was a page folded many times over. Dry, brittle, but intact. I unfolded it slowly by feel. The words were raised, embossed, as if etched by fingernail. I begged them to let me out. They said I hadn't finished remembering, but what they wanted me to remember wasn't mine. Suddenly the lid above me shifted, just slightly, then click. The latch released. I didn't wait. I shoved the lid upward, gasping, sucking in air, like someone surfacing from drowning. I sat up. The ritual room was empty. No candles, no Lady Thorne, no signs of anyone. Only the coffin beside mine open, also empty. But something was written inside its lid, in charcoal. "Welcome back." I stood on shaking legs, my mouth still dry, my voice still gone, but my thoughts louder than ever. Stillness wasn't silence. It was suppression, a slowing down until even memory gave up. And I had almost let it take me. As I stepped out of the coffin, I noticed something else. My reflection in the silver latch. It blinked. Before I did, I froze, watched again, and this time it smiled. But I didn't. The reflection was no longer mine. Not entirely. Something had followed me back. Or perhaps something had been waiting for me to return. I fled the room, half running, half dreaming. The hallways twisted in ways I didn't remember. Doors that once led to the garden room now opened into stairwells. The thought chamber was gone, replaced by a mirror with no glass. Just black velvet gently pulsing. I reached room V, my room. Or what remained of it. Inside, everything was duplicated. 2 beds, 2 journals, 2 robes, 2 sets of shoes. I checked the mirror on the wall. Only one of me, but I didn't trust it anymore. I opened my journal, the red one, and found a new entry written in the same shaky, angular hand. If you're reading this, then you made it back. But you won't stay, not for long. The house remembers what you touched. and it always reclaims what sees too much. At the bottom, one last sentence. Sleep in the coffin again, and you won't wake up alone. I closed the journal, locked the door, sat in the corner of the room where the candlelight didn't reach, and waited for dawn. But dawn never came. Only the scratching behind the walls, and the voice of the girl whispering, "You left the lid open." It was the mirror that led me to the garden, not through reflection, but by refusal. That morning, it showed nothing. Not my face, not the room, just the faint shimmer of a surface where something used to be. I waved my hand in front of it. Nothing, only cold, and then a gust. A breeze faint but unmistakable coming from behind the wardrobe again. But this time, not downward. Sideways, I moved the wardrobe for the second time. This time, it groaned, resisting as if something on the other side didn't want me to return. Behind it, the panel was ajar, and beyond it, a tunnel I hadn't seen before. A corridor of stone and vine, like an overgrown root system beneath the house. The air smelled ancient, soil rot and rose petals long since dried. I stepped through. The corridor led to a door of twisted iron. A sign above it rusted and half-fallen read, "The Garden of Still Ones, visitors by invitation only." No lock, just silence. I pushed. The hinges shrieked a sound I hadn't heard in days. It startled me more than any scream. Inside, the light was green, filtered through ivy-choked glass ceilings. Dust floated like pollen. Time seemed reluctant to move. The garden was massive. Rows of stone beds stretched out in neat concentric circles like ripples in a pond, each holding a figure. But they weren't sculptures. Not really. They were bodies, human-shaped, but too still, too composed. Each lay in a perfect imitation of sleep. Hands folded, eyes closed, draped in robes. No breathing, no decay, just preservation. I walked among them, heart trembling. Some were young, some old, all peaceful. I reached out to touch one, an elderly man with a beard like ash and moss. His skin was cold, hard, but not stone, more like wax, like memories suspended in form. At his feet, a nameplate. Silas Wren. Returned to silence. The next row revealed more familiar faces. One man I recognized from the garden room, the one who always stirred his spoon 12 times. Another was the woman in green. Still elegant, still poised, eyes closed, but I could feel the thought frozen behind her brow. Her lips almost curled into a final whisper. But it was the next bed that stopped me cold, because it was me, lying there, sleeping, wearing the same robe, same scar above the left brow, even the small ink stain on the fingers of the right hand. A perfect replica, but the face wasn't at peace. It was caught in the middle of something, a decision, as if unsure whether it was falling asleep or waking up. I stepped closer, trembling. The plaque at the base simply read, "Elias, awaiting return." My breath caught. I backed away, and then I saw them. At the edge of the garden, half hidden beneath vine-covered trellises, more coffins. But not on beds. These stood upright like mausoleums, their glass panels revealing figures trapped in mid-motion, not sleeping, reaching, mouths open in silent screams. Some clawed, some prayed, some watched. Their eyes moved, slow, barely, but enough. And standing among them was the girl. Braided hair, bare feet, same expression, quiet curiosity. She tilted her head when she saw me, and then she pointed. Not at the screaming coffins, not at the sleeping ones, but at the far wall, where a single door waited. Wooden, simple, etched with a spiral. I didn't move. Not yet. I looked at her. Is this what stillness means? I whispered. She didn't answer, but her expression shifted. Not sadness, not pity, recognition. Like she had once asked the same question and heard no answer either. I turned back to the replica of myself. Its face had changed. The corners of its eyes glistened. A single tear had frozen mid-fall. The lips now parted just enough to whisper something I couldn't hear. I leaned in. Close! Too close. And for a fraction of a second, I saw the eyes open. Just enough. Just long enough. To look at me, I stumbled back, heart pounding. The girl was gone. The upright coffins had gone dim. The garden was no longer peaceful. The light had shifted. Green turned to gray. Stillness had turned into waiting. And I no longer wanted to know what it waited for. I ran through the ivy corridor, back through the panel, back into my room. The mirror was still blank, but on the glass now drawn in fog, a single word, soon. That night, I tried not to sleep, but the bed was no longer mine. The coffin wouldn't open, and the journal had vanished. I sat on the floor, staring at the wardrobe, listening, because I knew when they came for me next time, they wouldn't knock. They would simply open the door and take back what they believed was theirs. It began with a simple decision. I will leave. That morning I stood by the window of room fee and watched the trees. They had always swayed gently as if breathing with the house. But today, they stood still. Absolutely still. Not a rustle. Not a single leaf moved. As if waiting, I packed quietly. Not much to take, just the robe, the journal, what remained of it. And the name, I wasn't sure, still belonged to me. I walked to the front entrance just after breakfast. The doors were open, sunlight pooling at the threshold like honey. But something about the light was off. Too golden, too slow, as if it wasn't light at all, but a memory of morning replaying itself. I stepped through it. The gravel path that had brought me here was gone. In its place, thick heather, endless, winding, and wrong. The trees weren't where I remembered. The hills had shifted. Even the wind smelled like dust stirred by breath, not air. I kept walking, one foot in front of the other, measuring each step against the beat of my heart, a rhythm I could still claim as mine. 10 minutes in, I saw the gate. Or rather, a gate. Not the same one. This one was older wrought iron bent into a spiral. No latch, no hinges. Just a curve leading back into itself. Beyond it, a stone marker, carved with my name. No dates, just this. Return too soon. I turned around. Stillness House stood behind me, but closer than it should have been. It had moved. The ivy on its walls had grown longer, snaking out toward the grass. Windows blinked like eyes catching light. It was watching me. I broke into a run, back into the house, through the east corridor, then the west. Past the garden room, now covered in mist that hadn't been there before. The thought chamber was gone. The hollow room sealed again. Every door I tried either led back to room V or somewhere worse. One hallway, once lined with mirrors, now showed nothing, not even shadows. Another turned into a staircase descending endlessly, coiling tighter with each step until I had to crawl. When I reached the bottom, I was at my own door again. Room V, unchanged, unmoved. Waiting, I slammed it shut behind me, bolted it, turned the wardrobe sideways to brace it, though I knew it would do no good. The mirror was lit now dimly, and inside it I could see myself asleep on the bed. But I was standing. I reached out. My reflection did not. It only smiled. I screamed, loud this time. The sound came out hoarse, but it came, and the walls shivered in reply. Dust fell from the ceiling. A soft hiss came from behind the wallpaper, like parchment being peeled by invisible hands. Then came a knock, not on the door, on the window. I turned slowly. Outside, just beyond the glass, the girl, standing in the garden, hair damp with dew, bare feet on the ivy. She placed one palm against the pane and mouthed, "You were never meant to leave." Then she vanished. That night, the staff brought dinner to my room. For the first time ever, no words, no tray, just a bowl of clear broth placed silently on the floor. I didn't touch it, not because I feared it was poison, but because I feared it might remember me. I tried again at dawn, wrapped my shoes in cloth to muffle the sound, slipped through a servant corridor behind the wardrobe, found an old door, splintered wood, rusted knob. Outside fog, not morning fog, memory fog. The kind that makes you forget why you were leaving in the first place. I pressed forward, step by step, until the ground beneath me changed, softened, turned to carpet. When I looked down, I was walking the hall outside room V. Stillness had learned me, memorized me, and now it was mirroring me. I collapsed onto the floor, cried, real tears this time, not because I was afraid, but because I couldn't remember what I was trying to escape. A name, a reason, a home. They had all grown dim, as if silence had reached up through my throat and gently erased my tongue. The door behind me creaked. Lady Thorne stood there, in black again, eyes softer than ever. "Most run," she said. "Few return." She knelt beside me, brushed dust from my shoulder. Stillness is not imprisonment. It is preservation. I looked up, eyes burning. "Then why does it feel like dying?" She tilted her head, almost smiled. "Because you have not yet learned how to live without sound." She rose, left without another word. And as the door closed behind her, I heard something I hadn't heard in days. The sound of my own heartbeat. And it was slowing. When I woke, the door was already open. No knock, no whisper. Just a breeze where there should have been still air. On the floor, 2 black feathers. Crossed, an invitation, or a sentence. The house no longer creaked when I walked. It breathed. The walls didn't echo. They listened. Every footstep, a question. Every silence, an answer. I followed the path laid before me, not because I trusted it, but because it was the only path left. The ritual room was no longer the same. Candles lined the walls in double rows, their flames still and vertical, as if frozen in time's exhale. And at the center, 2 coffins, side by side, lids open, identical in shape, but not in presence. One gleamed like polished obsidian, its interior lined with mirrored silver, swirling with faint movement beneath the surface. The other was matte, charred. Its interior was blacker than anything I'd ever seen, a void without depth or reflection. And standing between them, Lady Thorne. She said nothing, only raised her hand and motioned me forward. I stepped into the circle of flame. The warmth should have comforted me. Instead, it pressed against my skin like a question I wasn't ready to answer. She gestured to the first coffin, the mirrored one. "This is the self you remember," she said. "All your pain, your names, your stories, your reflection. You may return to it and resume." Then she turned to the second. "This is forgetting, not death, not erasure, only stillness without memory. No more questions, no more voices in the walls, no more choice." She stepped back and left me alone. The mirrored coffin shimmered. I stepped closer, inside a perfect image of me as I was. Tired, confused, but alive. My eyes blinked in sync with mine. My chest rose and fell with my breath. I reached in my hand, met the hand of the reflection. Warm, tangible. It smiled, but the smile did not reach its eyes. Then I turned to the dark one. It pulled at me, not with gravity, but with familiarity. I stepped to its edge and looked inside. There was nothing. No image, no lining, no echo. But in the space where a body would rest, I felt peace. Not the calm of safety, but the calm of ending, of a story being folded shut. I looked to Lady Thorne. Her expression had not changed. "The mirror is a door," she said. "The void is a window. You must choose which way you wish to see the world again." I laughed, a bitter, breathless thing. This was never healing. Her head tilted. "No," she agreed. "It was remembering." Behind me, I heard a sound. I turned. The girl. She stood by the candles, watching, silent. Her eyes were wide, not pleading, not warning, just waiting. She raised one hand and pointed, not to either coffin, but to me. My heart shuddered, because in that moment I realized this choice wasn't about which coffin. It was about whether I still believed I had a self left to choose with. I stepped forward, placed one hand on the edge of the mirror coffin. The reflection smiled. It mouthed, "Let's go back." But something was wrong. Its other hand wasn't resting on the velvet. It was curled into a fist. Tightly, I looked closer and saw ink stains. Fresh. Not mine, not yet. The reflection had written something. After I left, I pulled my hand back and turned. The void waited. It offered nothing. No warmth, no promise. But it didn't lie. It didn't reflect. Didn't tempt. It simply was. I looked to the girl one last time. She nodded. Solemn, almost kind. Lady Thorne raised both hands. Not in blessing, in farewell. One coffin is return, the other is surrender. But both are you. I stepped into the void. There was no texture, no sensation, only absence. And then sound. Not from outside, from within. A heartbeat, mine, but not where it used to be. I tried to move. There was no body, only breath, only thought. And then, a voice, my voice. I was never here to rest. I was here to remember I had never slept. The darkness cracked. Light did not enter, but understanding did. I saw everything. The house, the rituals, the coffins, the whispers. They weren't traps. They were mirrors of the people who entered them. And I had never truly been choosing between two coffins. I had been choosing whether to be seen. When I opened my eyes, I was standing in the garden room, daylight streaming through the glass, food warm on the table. The other guests turned to me. They smiled and nodded, as if I had always been there, and perhaps I had. But when I looked into the window, I saw no reflection, only the girl, sitting in the garden, braid undone, eyes closed. Smiling, the garden room was still warm. Too warm. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, just as it always had, casting golden rectangles on the floor. The table was set. Porridge steamed. Teacups trembled faintly beside folded napkins. And the guests, they were smiling, but their eyes were empty. I sat among them. I stirred my spoon. I even raised the cup to my lips. But nothing had taste. The warmth didn't burn. The texture didn't register. I tried to speak, to say something, anything. But the words remained inside me, tangled like roots, too deep to pull free. I looked to the head of the table. Lady Thorne was gone. In her place sat the girl, unmoving, hair unbraided, hands resting atop the table like folded wings. She stared directly at me, not blinking, not breathing, just waiting. When I stood, no one followed. No heads turned. No footsteps echoed. I walked through the corridor, but the doors no longer led to rooms. They opened into versions. The thought chamber now echoed with the sound of dripping water, though no basin remained. Room V no longer had walls, just an endless library of blank books, all titled with my name. And the hollow room gone. In its place, a spiral staircase, descending, always descending. I hesitated at its mouth. The air had changed. Cooler, but not physical. It was memory cooled, like walking into the moment, just after a loved one forgets your face. Stillness greeted me like an old friend. I descended. One step, two. Each step echoed before I placed my foot, as if the sound came not from me, but from a memory of myself already walking this path. Down and down. Stone gave way to bone. The walls no longer held torches, but faces. Carved, frozen, dozens, maybe hundreds. Eyes closed, lips parted slightly. Some I recognized. Others, I was starting to. Faces I had seen in dreams. Faces I had worn. At the bottom, a single door. No lock, no handle. Just the shape of a handprint in the center, too small for mine. I placed my palm against it anyway. The door sighed and opened. Inside was a room with no ceiling. Above me stars, but not the stars I knew. They pulsed gently, each one shaped like a symbol I had seen scratched into the coffin lids, into the velvet, into my thoughts. Stillness was written in the sky, and in the center of the room, a pool. Shallow, black, silent. I stepped toward it. My reflection didn't greet me. Instead, it showed a version of myself that had never left the coffin. Still lying there, eyes closed, hands folded. But around it roots had grown. Through the wood, into the body, feeding from it. The reflection opened its eyes and smiled. Not kindly, but knowingly, I looked away. The girl stood behind me now, barefoot, no longer young. Her eyes had changed. Older, wiser, endless. She didn't speak, but I heard her inside. This is not a prison. This is a pattern. All who enter descend. All who descend return. But not all who return remember how to climb. She stepped into the pool, but made no ripples. She turned and held out her hand. Come see. I followed. The pool accepted me like ink into paper. No cold, no depth. Just the sensation of being absorbed. We didn't sink. We merged. Into the floor, into the stars, into each other. And the room became not a place, but a voice. And the voice said, there is no self, only shape, only silence given form. When I opened my eyes, I was back, in room V. But not this room V, a different one, a version that smelled of lavender and parchment, where the bed was untouched, the candle freshly lit, and the mirror, whole again. I stepped toward it. This time I saw no reflection, but behind the glass I saw all the selves I had been, each standing still, each in their own room, each waiting for a choice. Some had stepped into the mirror, others into the dark. But one remained, eyes locked with mine, and whispered, it never ends unless you stop asking which version is real. The mirror fractured, not from shattering, but from too many truths pressing outward at once. I closed my eyes and breathed, not air, but thought. The walls around me faded. The house exhaled, and I descended one last time, not through corridors, but through myself. Through memory, through doubt, through everything I had refused to feel. And at the bottom, stillness, not as prison, not as cure, but as the final honest thing that remained when all other noise had been laid to rest. It's been 5 years, at least that's what the calendar says, but time feels different now, soft at the edges like old paper that folds too easily. I live in a small flat above a bakery. The walls are thin. I hear laughter from the couple downstairs, arguments from the artist next door, footsteps from strangers I've never met. Noise surrounds me again, but I've never been more aware of how loud the world tries to be when it's hiding something. I have a job, something quiet, archiving old documents in a city library no one visits anymore. People pass by my desk like ghosts. They smile. I smile back. But no one ever says my name. Sometimes I wonder if I still have one. At night, I light a single candle. No electricity in my bedroom. Not by accident. I removed the bulb years ago. Too harsh. Too modern. Candlelight moves the way memory does. Slow, flickering, uncertain. It reminds me of her, of stillness. For a long time, I believed I had escaped. The house, the garden, the mirrors. I told myself it was ritual, that the descent had a bottom, that I'd reached it, returned. But last month, the first whisper came, soft, just beneath hearing. You left the lid open. At first I dismissed it, a dream, or the wind through the vent, or the bakery's old pipes. But then it came again. We remember you, always when I was alone, always just as I drifted toward sleep, and always from behind the wall where there should have been nothing. I checked. Of course I did. Peeled back the wallpaper, tapped for hollow places, listened for mice. But the wall was solid, thick, unyielding. Yet the whisper persisted and grew clearer. Last week I dreamt of the garden room. Not how it was, but how it became. Overgrown. Vines twisted into symbols. The porridge bowls filled with feathers. Each guest wearing my face. Lady Thorne stood at the end of the table. She didn't speak. She only placed a finger to her lips. and smiled with someone else's mouth. When I woke, my pillow was damp, not from sweat, from dew, fresh, as if I'd slept under ivy. And on my nightstand, a black feather. I haven't told anyone, not the neighbors, not my sister, not the old priest who walks past my building every Thursday. What would I say? There's a house I left but didn't. There's a room where I died but kept breathing. There's a silence that remembers my name better than I do. Sometimes I catch my reflection in shop windows. It always waves first. Tonight I lit the candle earlier than usual. The sun hadn't fully set, but I could feel the whisper waiting. I sat at the desk, opened the drawer I never use, and found it. The red journal. I don't remember bringing it with me, but there it was. A little more faded, a little more aware. I opened to the last page and saw something new. If you are reading this, you already answered. But some doors don't close when you leave. They close when they forget you existed. And beneath it, a child's handprint, drawn in ash. At midnight, the whisper returned. Not from the wall this time, from the mirror. It was fogged, though the air was still. I stepped toward it, wiped the surface, and saw not myself, but room V, as if the mirror were a window or a memory. There was the bed, unmade, the candle still burning, and the coffin open, empty. Then the girl appeared, in the corner of the reflection, smaller than I remembered, but somehow older. She looked up, met my eyes, and mouthed. We kept it ready. I backed away. The mirror stayed fogged, but the whisper didn't follow. It stayed in the glass. Patient, polite, present. I haven't slept in 2 nights, not because of fear, but because I know what's coming. The dream, the spiral, the knock. Not on the door, on the inside of my skull. Come back, not a threat. Not even a command, just a request from someone who never stopped waiting. And tonight I will answer. The candle is nearly gone. The mirror no longer shows the room, only stars, swirling, a spiral in reverse. I've placed the journal beside me, the robe across the chair, and my name somewhere safe. Because when they come, I won't bring it. Names are too loud. All that matters now is this. Stillness never ends. It only changes rooms. And I'm ready to move again. I didn't plan a goodbye. There was no one left to say it to. The neighbors will think I moved. The library will find my desk empty but tidy. No forwarding address, no final message. Just a robe folded neatly on the pillow, a journal left open to a blank page, and a mirror turned to face the wall. The night I returned, the streets were unusually still. Not quiet still, like the air itself was holding its breath. I didn't follow a map. There was no path, only memory, or something older than memory, something that remembered me. Stillness House stood as it always had, not crumbling, not waiting, simply there, as if it had never left, because maybe it hadn't. Maybe I had only drifted far enough for it to feel distant, and now the tide had brought me back. The front doors opened with a sigh. Inside, nothing had changed. The candles still burned, the air still hummed with thought, and the rooms no longer tried to mislead me. They knew I wasn't here to escape. Not anymore. Room V welcomed me without resistance. The sheets were turned down. The feather was white again. On the writing desk, a cup of the green tea, still warm. Not waiting, expecting. And beside it, A single black ribbon wrapped around a small flat key. I didn't hesitate. I drank the tea slowly. Let it fill me not with sleep, but with softness, with surrender. Then I took the key and walked. The ritual room had changed. No circle of coffins, no flickering candles. Only one, at the center, raised on a stone platform, covered in white silk. Not a coffin, a cradle, just as they had always said. Lady Thorne was there, not older, not younger, just exactly as I remembered her. She smiled not as a guide, but as someone who had already passed through the same door. "Welcome home," she said. That was all. She stepped aside. The cradle opened with a sigh, as if it had missed me. Inside velvet softer than I remembered, cool as midnight. No mirrors, no symbols, just silence and shape. I lay down. It embraced me, not as a bed does, not even as earth does, but as stillness does, with no boundaries, no need, only knowing. Above me, the ceiling dissolved. Stars once more, but this time they did not pulse. They simply faded one by one, as if someone had gently closed their eyes so they could finally rest. I closed mine too, and felt it begin. Not sleep, not death, not descent, but dissolution, like ink in warm water, like a name whispered backward, like a final page left intentionally blank. No dreams came, only presence, only that last gentle truth I had never been able to say aloud. I never left, because you cannot leave what remembers you better than you remember yourself. My last breath was not a sound, it was a shape. The shape of a child's hand closing gently over mine. And then, stillness. They will not find me. There will be no grave, no marker, no name. But perhaps if one listens carefully on the edge of sleep, just before the world softens into something slower, they might hear me, not calling, not crying, just whispering. It's okay now. The lid was never locked. I don't expect you to believe me. That isn't the point. Stories like this aren't told to convince. They're told to remember for those who've forgotten what silence can sound like when it begins to speak. There are places in the world that don't show up on maps, not because they're hidden, but because they don't need to be found. They wait patiently for the right kind of mind, the right kind of forgetting. Stillness House was never a destination. It was a mirror held up to the parts of me I'd long since buried beneath noise. We spend our lives filling space with words, with things, with distractions disguised as obligations. But there are moments rare, terrifying, essential, when everything goes quiet. When the world stops asking and starts listening. And if you're still enough, you'll hear it. The question behind the question. Who are you when you're not performing yourself? The coffins weren't cages. They were permission to stop being useful, to stop reacting, to let memories settle like ash, so something older, quieter, truer could rise. Some call it healing, others call it surrender. I've come to call it returning, because deep inside all of us, there is a room without light, without name, where the truest version of us is curled, not asleep, but waiting. And when you get quiet enough, when the world stops spinning and the mirrors stop reflecting, you'll find that room. And in it, you'll find a voice you haven't heard since childhood. Yours, Before it was taught to shout, before it was told to shrink, I left stillness. Or at least I thought I did. But sometimes I wonder if it was the other way around. If stillness allowed me to dream of returning just long enough to carry its seed into this world. Because I've felt it since. In hospital rooms where people no longer speak. In forests so quiet, you can hear your own blood moving. In the spaces between grief and healing. In the moment just before sleep. That pull, that question, that invitation. Not everyone accepts it. Some run, some forget, some choose the mirror. And that's okay. Stillness is not a religion. It demands no worship, only recognition. That silence isn't empty. It's full of memory, of possibility, of selves we outgrew or abandoned. I sometimes wonder what became of the others. The woman in green, the boy who wept without sound, the artist who scratched symbols into his spoon. Are they still sleeping? Or did they, like me, wake into a life that no longer fits? I wonder, but I don't need the answer. Because stillness taught me this. Not every truth is meant to be spoken. Some are meant to be held. Gently. Like a breath you're not ready to release. And if you're wondering why I'm telling you all this now, it's not because I need you to understand. It's because I want you to remember that strange hush you sometimes feel before sleep. That moment when your name feels distant. When your reflection lingers just a little too long. That's stillness, calling, not with urgency, but with invitation. So if the day comes, and it might when you receive a letter with no return address, signed only with a spiral, don't be afraid. Just listen and ask yourself, am I still performing the version of me that the world built? Or am I ready to meet the part of me that was always still? If you are, then take the tea, lie down, close your eyes, and let the quiet in. Because the lid was never locked. It was only waiting for you to close it from the inside.